Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey. From the Marvel Cinematic Universe comes one of the most popular Avengers of all time, in a sequel to the film that kickstarted the MCU, pitting the character in a fight for survival against a man who will stop at nothing to destroy him. We're talking about Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 was directed by Jon Favreau and a screenplay by Justin Theroux. It is the follow-up to 2008's Iron Man and was released in the United States on May 10th, 2010. It was produced by Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios and was distributed by Paramount Pictures. The film features characters created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, Don Heck, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko, and published by Marvel Comics. Iron Man debuted in Tales of Suspense number 39 in March of 1963. Iron Man is set 6 months after the events of the first film, which saw billionaire industrialist and military contractor Tony Stark escape imprisonment in the Middle East thanks to a suit of armor he built, which he later refined to become the adventurer known as Iron Man. Also returning for the sequel is Tony's longtime assistant, Pepper Potts, his right-hand man, Happy Hogan, and his best friend, James Rhodes. The main antagonist of the story is Ivan Vanko, the son of Anton Vanko, a former Stark Industries tech who stole from Tony's father and later dies in Russia. Ivan swears revenge and builds his own version of the arc reactor, the same technology that powers Iron Man's suit and keeps Tony alive. Ivan travels to America where he attacks Tony and after an alliance with rival arms dealer Justin Hammer becomes Whiplash. The two work together to build an army of drones to overtake Tony's position as the government's primary weapons manufacturer, but Ivan's thirst for vengeance soon becomes clear, leading to the climactic third act. Iron Man 2 was a hit at the box office, earning $624 million on a budget of $200 million and was the third highest grossing film of 2010. It received generally favorable reviews from critics and was followed by a sequel in 2013. Thanks to the action, the story, and the special effects, Iron Man 2 continues to be a favorite of MCU fans all over the world. And that's the lowdown on Iron Man 2. The problem with a part 2 of anything is that you are rolling the dice. Good luck matching the success, matching the impact, matching the oomph of the first film. It's made all the more difficult when the first film is a blockbuster. We're talking about, not just a popcorn movie, but a movie that seeks to perhaps build a universe. You can only point to a handful of movies, maybe 10 or less, that actually build a universe on the silver screen. And again, when you try to follow up part 2 of that universe building, it may or may not be awesome. But I think we've found multiple times in the past, a lot of times anyway, you come away from part 2 and people say, well, hey Tom, how was that part 2? And you go, wasn't as good as the first. And that becomes the tagline that people repeat to each other all the time. Very few exceptions. Popular opinion. And kids, entertainment is subjective. In case you didn't know, spoiler alert, what you may love, Phil and I may hate, or vice versa. It could go either way, folks. But popular opinion, a lot of people say, well, Spider-Man 2, much better than Spider-Man 1. Empire, much better than A New Hope. It just depends on where you personally fall. When it comes to the MCU, we covered Iron Man here on the 6M, and the impact that film had, doing what we didn't realize at the time was universe building. We had all heard rumors and whispers that there was a lot more to come and maybe one day the Avengers. And I'm like, sure, whatever, pal. But you know what? I got, shut up, and that's fine because I love being wrong when something awesome happens. So following up Iron Man 1 with Iron Man 2, as we said at the intro, folks, rolling the dice. Good luck to you, buddy. And let's hope you don't screw it up. Phil, during the first Iron Man episode here on the 6M, we kind of teased what we thought about part 2 and a little bit of part 3. Upon watching this movie again, I'm going to look at the positivity here before we go into any sort of negativity or maybe down points personally, what we'll both think of the film. Upon watching this again for the first time, maybe in a while, right? Did you pull anything positive this time where maybe it didn't hit you quite as weird as it did the first time? Or was it sort of the same experience for you watching it again?
I would say the first time I watched it, I enjoyed Iron Man 2. I just think it kind of falls apart on more and more viewings, and I hadn't seen it in a long time before I watched it this time. And there are still things that I really like about it, but boy, there are some things that just don't work.
Well, we got a big show here, and we got a lot to get into. And you don't have to get crazy specific out the gate here, but was it character development? Was it story? Was it both? I mean, let's get out of the way what we think worked. The effects. The effects are on par. The suitcase suit, which is freaking awesome, uh, still great. Uh, can we both kind of agree that the effects part of it is top notch? Was there anything that you had heartburn with on that part?
No, I think the movie looks good for the most part. I would say that most of the characters in this movie are likable characters, and I mean, I think that it tries to do what the first movie does very well, and coast off of the fact that Robert Downey Jr. is just so good at playing his character. Um, uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't care. I don't care how many times I watch him suit up with the briefcase. It looks amazing every time I see it. It's still going to go down as one of those moments that are like defining for Iron Man.
Are you a red and gold armor guy? Or are you a red and silver armor guy?
I would say I'm a red and gold armor guy, but my favorite Iron Man armor is probably the Silver Centurion.
Ooh, nice.
I don't know what it is about it. It has the red and silver, and it has the shoulder pads. He briefly used it in
Mm-hmm.
Iron Man 3. But for some reason, I just really like that design.
I love the old school armor with the big like the big ovals around his shoulders. You know, the old school where it looks like his arms and legs are not armored, but they're like tights or something. I just love the old school look. I wish they would pull that off in a movie. I wish they had. That would have been cool. Um, but yeah, I love that they tweaked the suits, and as we get to part three, and we get to see a whole bunch of suits, which is cool for a whole other loads of reasons here. Um, upon viewing this again, I was reminded of what didn't work for me to begin with, but I also enjoyed it because it's Marvel, and as you said, Downey can do anything. He really can. He can do anything. He can take the weirdest moments and he can make them work. The whole deal at the beginning where ACDC's playing because it's an Iron Man film and it's Downey and ACDC just fits. It just fits. But he lands and you got the Iron Girls dancing around, which I'm not blind. I enjoy that part. I'm just, not to be all like that, but that could have been the hokiest thing anyone's ever seen. It really could have. But man, the way he undersold it, his expressions, the way he kind of pointed to the crowd, and you're like, oh, I think I could actually envision this happening on TV on CNN in real life. Like it just didn't feel make believe, but he saves so much of it. One of the things I bumped into was a certain actor's accent, which I honestly never had a problem with, but I did this time. Um, but before we get there, let's run through the cast here. Downey, as we said, returns as Tony Stank. Package for Tony Stank. So it's great. So he's back as Iron Man, of course. Gwyneth Paltrow is back as Pepper Potts, being all doing the things that only she can do. I still submit it's one of the best bits of casting in the entire MCU. It's a very understated role, but at the end of the day, it means so much. And there's callbacks when he gives her the job of CEO, and he says, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, and who would be the right fit?" Blah blah blah, and it's always been you. And there was a callback in Endgame when he's recording the message, and he says, "When I drift off, I'll be thinking of you. It's always you." And I'm like, I love how they always circle back to the earlier films. So that made me smile. I actually forgot that bit of dialogue. Um, Don Cheadle making his triumphant debut. as James Rhodey Rhodes. Now, you gave something of a hot take in the Iron Man 1 episode. Let's go ahead and cover that again. Who do you think is the best Rhodey now? Let's just get your honest take here.
I still really enjoy Terrence Howard as Rhodey. I still can't prefer him in the role, but I don't mind Don Cheadle. I think Don Cheadle is good. I think Don Cheadle gets better in the role in Iron Man 3 and the Avengers movies when he shows up. He's not bad in Iron Man 2. I just think some of the material they have him working with isn't great.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. I love the courtroom bit, which we referenced in the first episode about this series, when he just walks in, the camera's behind him and you don't see his face, and he's like, "What? Hey, pal, what are you doing here?" And he's like, "Don't even start with me, all right? Just don't even go there." That's the best bit ever.
Yeah, I thought that was great. But yeah, he's kind of given the position of being this kind of stick in the mud character for Tony for most of the movie, and he kind of comes off that way to us as an audience too, because he never really backs off of that for most of the movie. And then like you get to see him do some cooler things toward the end of the movie. He starts doing a little bit of joking in the final scene he's in. But yeah, for most of the movie, he's kind of just there.
Yeah, really straight laced. I continue to be bothered by the fact that we never had a fully realized backstory between Rhodey and Tony. Have we ever had anything beyond these guys are buddies? I don't recall there being any like in-depth, really exploration of why these guys are friends to begin with.
In the movies or in the comic books?
Yeah, in the movies. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't really get anything in the movies.
I mean, I would like to have seen something like a flashback of the moment they met, or why are they friends. Yeah, I'm kind of bothered we never got that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's missing with a lot of the Rhodey and Tony beats from this movie, is that we don't really get reasons as to why Rhodey would be conflicted dealing with Tony. We get the feeling that, you know, a lot of times he just feels like he's babysitting him. And yeah, I mean, we get that from their relationship in the first movie, but there's really nothing new here.
I do think there's moments where, like when Tony's in the car and he's down there, and he's really there to tear him apart because he's upset at him. It's like, you need to come up, you need to diffuse the situation. And Tony starts to get out of the car and he falls. And there's moments when things like that happen, and you can hear in Cheadle's voice, like, "Hey man, let me, holy God, are you okay?" And I love those moments where like he's allowed to be human a little bit. Like, this guy is still his friend. He's out of control, but like he's still his friend. And I think those moments saved it for me personally, where I didn't feel like he was so, I'm taking orders kind of thing. I actually love the fact that there's that little bit of dichotomy there. This is not a Commissioner Gordon and Batman relationship where Gordon just kind of lets him do whatever. Like, Rhodey doesn't answer to Tony. He's got to follow orders. So like, I kind of like that there's that little bit of friction like all the time between these two guys. But honestly, if you get too much one way or the other, it doesn't work, right? At all. So, Sam Rockwell as Justin freaking Hammer. I remembered that Sam is fun, and I remembered that he's entertaining, but I had forgotten how freaking entertaining he was. I loved Sam Rockwell in this film. Dude, I'm going to gush. I love this guy. Perfect guy to play Justin Hammer. Tacky, classless, tasteless, just gives you you shake his hand, you want to go take a shower. Like, you just feel dirty. Like, you just feel like he's a bad guy, but you can't put your finger on it. What about Sam Rockwell in Iron Man 2?
Yeah, he's great. He's great as Justin Hammer. I think he does this really, really fun, almost like bizarro version of Tony, that wants to do all the things Tony does, but he also shows like clear insecurities. and he's just not as competent as Tony, and it shows several times in the movie, especially in the court scene. I think that's one of the funniest parts when he kind of exposes him in the courtroom, and then he runs and tries to unplug the VCR. Hilarious.
Oh, so good. And like, it didn't occur to him to hit the power button on the monitor. That never occurred to him.
Yeah, he's just struggling to try and unplug this thing. It's so funny.
And it's great because he tries to mimic Tony, like he's trying to live up to Tony's example. So instead of AC/DC, he comes out dancing to a song called "Pick Up the Pieces" by the Average White Band, which is if anyone on the planet hears that song, I don't care how old you are, you're probably going to know the melody from something, even if it was just a quick 20-second "Where Are They Now" clip on TV or some nonsense. But it's one of those when you hear it, you're like, oh, I know that song. But of course, the white guy that can't dance comes out dancing to it. And it was so good. And I don't know the backstory on that, but I would hope that he was told, just be as dumb as you can possibly be, but keep a straight face, but just screw it up. I hope that's the direction, because it was awesome. It worked for me. It totally worked for me. And then, there's comments where they're at that big party and he says, oh, well, you're not the only rich guy here, Tony, which is great. Like and we see that mimicked again in Iron Man 3, not for nothing, but we see yet another rich guy who's sort of trying to live up to the Tony Stark example set by Tony Stark. So that's just hard to do. Here's the guy that I was referencing earlier with the accent. Mickey Rourke as Ivan Vanko, or Ivan, okay? Also known as Whiplash. Okay. Why does this villain work for you, and why does this villain not work for you in this film?
I think that his motives work, but I don't think that he ever develops beyond his initial motives. He's kind of his character is kind of thin. Like, there's not really much to his character. It's just basically the motives we're giving in the trailer, essentially, and that's it. I think he looks the part as a villain. I think when we see him suit up in like the prototype of the Whiplash suit for the Monaco scenes, they're great. I think him menacing and sometimes his scenes are good, but yeah, sometimes the accent and the bird and like the yeah, the random parts where he's because he is Russian, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, the parts where he's flipping between Russian and English sometimes don't translate very well. But visually, he's an interesting villain.
And I think they could have explained that away with something, a throwaway line as very simple as he was born in Russia, but he went to college here in the United States until X, Y, and Z happened, and they deported him back to Russia like his father was. Like, I would have been on track with that because that would have explained the accent. I thought in small doses he freaking nailed the Russian accent, but that one moment where he talked for a really long time, that's when I started hearing, and I wasn't looking for it to fall apart, but I'm like, oh, okay, I hear it now. I hear what kind of people were complaining about when this movie hit. Like, I kind of get it. This was around the time of The Wrestler, so he was having like a career resurgence. In phenomenal shape, this guy. Physically, he's perfect for the role. You want someone that you could believe could physically stand up to Iron Man, even with, he's got a suit of armor on, but still, he's physically imposing. I found it funny at the racetrack when he's suited up like all the other mechanics, but yet he looks like he's wearing all this padding under the suit. Like, does no one notice the big tattooed guy with the toothpick in his mouth? It's just, come on, man.
Yeah, his suit is protruding out like he's wearing something under it.
Yeah. And no one thinks to question him, hey, who are you again? So, yeah. Sam Jackson is back, kids, as the one and only Nick Fury. We get an appearance by Elon Musk. Let's see, Christina Amanpour from, was it CNN, actually has a take here. So does Bill O'Reilly. We'll talk about him as little as possible. So yeah, Larry Ellison also shows up in a very quick moment from the Oracle Corporation. So, you would have to believe that Tony Stark would be hanging out with the richest guys on the planet. Um, so yeah, that's good stuff right there. This movie, of course, directed once again, as part one was, by the one only the great Jon Favreau. The cast as a whole, if you had to recast Whiplash, would you have recast him, or do you think that Mickey Rourke does a good enough job with how it turned out? I mean, do you think it's on him? Do you think it's the character? Is it both?
Um, I don't think Mickey Rourke is bad casting. I think he would have come across better if they gave him a little bit more development later in the movie. Because again, he fits the part. He looks great. And I think even some of his one-liners they work. I just think that after the first act, he never really developed into anything else.
I found it funny that he did a lot of his bad guy stuff from a bunker somewhere and then didn't show up in Tony's face till the very end. And then that didn't last very long. I was kind of hoping for, a much wider, much longer confrontation physically with the suits,
I think they were attempting to do some commentary on drones, and
good call. Yeah,
and that made sense, but again, they didn't really give it the time to develop into anything really interesting.
Yeah, I'll take that. Three other names we didn't mention here, folks. Clark Gregg is back as Phil Coulson. Again, another bit of perfect casting. Leslie Bibb is back from the from Iron Man 1 as Christine Everhart, and they reference the fling or the one night stand that she had with Tony in the first movie. The John Slattery version of Howard Stark is here, and this is not the same Howard Stark from Iron Man 1, because in Iron Man 1 we only got photos of him, and it's not the same actor. It's a guy that looks a lot like the photos of whoever they had in those mock-ups. But as we know, there are two. There's Dominic Cooper and John Slattery, and we've covered that here on the show before. We also have to mention Gary Shandling as Senator Stern, he's smarmy. He's crooked. You kind of feel like he's a jerk. And Gary Shandling is freaking great. I don't know if Gary will ever get enough credit for this. Gary gets a lot of credit for stuff that he did that he really richly deserves. He was so brilliant, right? I don't know if he'll ever get enough credit for this, but I loved, and I wish he was still with us so he could have just kept portraying this character forever, because, man, it was so good, dude. And, of course, it all tied back in at the end when he was forced to eat crow and give Tony and what did he give Tony and Rhodey? The Medal of Valor or something, or some kind of recognition?
Yeah, I forgot what it was a medal for. Yeah, but he gives him a medal at the end, and that scene is really, really funny.
It's really good. And something else that happened, the girl at the car who serves Tony with the subpoena to appear before the government, he says, "What's your name?" And she says, "Marshall." But what's funny to me is she was in the film We Are Marshall. So I can't sit here and say that's what happened. Like, I don't know. But I would think that maybe that has something to do with why her character's name was Marshall. I don't really know. I've never looked that up before. But there's enough in this movie to make you think, it just feels like a connected world. It feels like a real place, which is when they lay enough of a foundation to build the world around them, I enjoy it much more. We also got the obligatory Stan Lee cameo, which this time was great. He didn't have any speaking parts this time, but he was Larry King, and obviously he kind of looked like Larry King in the end, so that worked. I love that his cameos in the Iron Man films were kind of throwaway. But then he got the last laugh in Endgame with the Tony Stank stuff, or in that was Civil War, wasn't it? That he had the Endgame or the Tony Stank reference, I believe.
Yeah, that was Civil War.
Yeah, so that's good. Overall as a cast, Phil, how are we feeling overall as a cast? Considering strength and weaknesses and everything, pretty solid for this movie, you think?
Yeah, I agree. we've got this is the first movie we see Scarlett Johansson in, and
How did I forget Black Widow, dude?
it's
Wow.
so interesting watching her back in this movie because she's so different in this movie than she is in any of the other movies as Widow. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so hard to figure out what to make of her as Widow in this movie because like she's doing a different voice in this movie. Um,
Yep.
she's largely just eye candy for most of the movie, and then she gets like the one action set piece that she does, and that's kind of it. Like she doesn't really get anything else other than that.
And why is she trying to sleep with Tony several times in this movie? Why is she doing it? Like,
I didn't get the feeling that she was trying to sleep with him. I think she was trying to seduce him um, to keep her cover. So just to stay close enough
ah,
to him to see what he was doing.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I guess had he took her up on it, would she have pulled back? Would she have said, "No, no, I changed my mind"? Yeah. Um, yeah, she it was kind of a head scratcher. Like we knew going in that she was Natasha. We knew this, right? But when she showed up with a cover story, my first thought, I guess because as a fan, sometimes I'm and this the pro wrestling fan side of me, kids coming out, but sometimes I immediately distrust what I'm being told. But this is Natalie, your assistant. I'm thinking, you mean to tell me they changed her name? Is she not Russian anymore? What's going on? Is she no longer going to be Natasha? This is the dumbest thing ever. Then I had to remind myself, this isn't pro wrestling, Tom. Relax. Take a breath. See what happens. So I'm glad I did. But you're right. This portrayal of Black Widow is unlike anything we saw in any other Marvel film. It's kind of a standalone performance, really.
Yeah,
Um,
Natalie Rushman.
yeah. I like how she destroyed Favreau in the ring. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first time she shows up and Tony is just kind of like ogling her, and then he goes, "What?" And she just she doesn't sell it at all. She just kind of stares at him.
Right. Yeah. Oh, she won't have the witty banter he's looking for. Like he's looking for that with people. Um, the banter he has with Coulson when Coulson's kind of sent to babysit him, and he comes in, he says, "Well, bye," and he's like going somewhere. It's like I'm being reassigned New Mexico, and he's like Land of Enchantment, so I'm told. And they just had that really quick back and forth, and he's like, "Good luck." He says, "We really need you." He says, "Yeah, more than you know." And he goes, "Not that much." And he just walks off. Like that stuff is so good to me. Um, being able to say that you held your own with Downey one on one in a scene. How many people can actually say that, right? But man, I love it. There's moments like that that are specific to Iron Man, the Iron Man world, in my opinion. Like it only works in those movies, and when it works, it's awesome. Um, but yeah, I'm here for it. I'm here for the dialogue, man. So many clever moments of things going on between these characters. Um, I always hit you with this question every time, and it seems like I have to point out that I hit you with this question, which is highly unnecessary. One day I'll not do this, but here it is anyway. The villain's plot, because this is important, dude. Whether it's a comic book film or a bang bang shoot 'em up or whatever, does the villain's plot hold together? Now I got your take to begin with of why he's doing what he's doing. His plan to get at Tony. Once Justin Hammer brings him in the fold, Justin kind of, dangles the carrot in front of him that he didn't have before. Now he's got a way to get revenge. The villain's plan in this movie, does it work for you as a whole?
We've got two different villain plans here. So Vanko's original plan is to just ambush Tony at this racetrack, and then when that falls awry, he just gets thrown in jail. And so then he kind of revises his plan after he gets recruited by Hammer to use Hammer's tech to then ambush Tony at the Stark Fair or whatever it's called, the Stark Convention Expo. There you go, Stark Expo. And that's pretty much all there is to his plan. I just want to kill him. I want revenge. There's nothing really sophisticated about it. The first time I tried on my own with a prototype, and then I came back with better armor and drones. Um, Justin Hammer doesn't really have a plan. He just kind of wants to one up Stark, and he just kind of fails miserably at it.
He wants a job in the Pentagon, as he said.
Yeah, he wants to.
That's his whole deal.
Yeah, he wants to one up Stark so that he can get the job at the Pentagon, and that's it. I think his entire plan is just to be wealthy, off of weapons. But there's not really much to his plan. His plan is just like, all right, well, I saw that this guy had a rudimentary arc reactor. That looked kind of cool. He kind of embarrassed Tony here. Oh, that was kind of funny. I'm gonna get this guy to jail and he'll help me. Okay, and then midway through, he's just like, I don't need you anymore.
Yeah, like he just. So Hammer wanted men in the suits because people wanted a man in the suit like Tony, and he's like, no, Jones better. He just kept saying Jones better, right? No man, Jones, and he's like, he's not having it, and the way they're going back and forth is hilarious. But he decides he doesn't need him anymore, and really he doesn't. Once he gets access to the tech, this guy is insanely smart. Like far more educated than anyone ever gave him credit for, which is very cool. I love the fact that there's, you look at this guy and you make a judgment call based on his appearance, but it turns out he's really crazy smart. What about the fact that this guy, based on plans, based on, what his dad gave to him, left to him after his death, this guy was able to come up with a bootleg arc reactor when people all over the world couldn't come up with it. But of course they didn't have the original plans, right? So what about that? Did that feel shallow to you at all? Or is it just like, this is comic book science, we're just going to go with it?
It didn't feel shallow. I think it did what it was supposed to do and show us that this guy is smart. He was a physicist, right?
Yes.
And so it served its purpose of showing like, hey, this guy's vision is physically imposing, but he's also very smart. And we see that a few times in the movie when he immediately just cracks the encryption for all of the firmware at Hammer within minutes, which is kind of, as you put it, comic book science. He's a physicist, but also a hacker. But no, I didn't mind all that stuff because it fits with Iron Man's role gallery of guys that are, hulking, but also like smart for reasons.
I like the way he said that, smart for reasons.
Yeah, it's always like this guy is really smart, but he is also like in phenomenal shape.
Of course. And tattooed up, and the Russian mob aspects are there 100%. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. Yeah, like was he a weightlifter? Was he an MMA fighter? We're not really sure. Yeah. So one of the things we talked about here on the show numerous times, one of the key draws to any Marvel property is, unlike the Distinguished Competition, not every time, kids, but a lot of the times the characters are extremely flawed. And you could talk to me all day long about Bruce Wayne. Oh, Tommy's so flawed. Batman, the story of Batman is not about Bruce Wayne. It's about Batman. The story of Spider-Man is about Peter Parker. It's not about Spider-Man. Never has been, never will be, which is a clear distinction in, fundamental storytelling between Marvel and the other guys. Any other guys, really. And we see that again here because Tony is screwed up. He's totally screwed up. The thing in his chest that's supposed to keep him alive is killing him. He's having to drink this stuff to keep him alive. And it's only working for, like, he's having to drink more and more every day to keep himself going. And he's keeping it hidden from Pepper that he's dying. Dude, I love the fact that it seems like in all three Iron Man films, he has a handicap from the get-go. Like there's something stopping him. Did we ever get a fully realized, no handicap, functioning 110% energy, everything fine. He's all good version of Iron Man. We got it in glimpses of the Avengers films, but we never got it in the Iron Man films, did we?
No, I think, but even in the Avengers movies that we see him in, he's dealing with something.
Mm.
Sadly, the only time I think that we see him at 100% with no real like mental issues, no real insecurities or health issues is an Endgame,
Mm.
and that's when they go and look for him after the gap to figure out time travel.
Right, because he's left it all behind.
Yeah,
Ooh.
he's now living a healthy life. He has a family. He's a dad. And then he gives all of that up to go and save the world again. So I think that's the closest we got.
Yeah. Which, you know, good luck telling a tech nerd he can't use tech anymore. I mean, I'm sure you and I both would consider ourselves tech nerds to a point, but we're not Tony Stark, Elon Musk level, right? So the fact that he had enough to the point of he walked away, that's impressive. I mean, he still had tech in the cabin for God's sake, like heads up digital display. So he hadn't let go of all of it, but he had enough to the point of saying, "I'm done. This is, I have to have a normal life now." Um, you're right, man. He didn't become a fully realized, like the best version of himself occurred, and then he had to lose it to save everyone. Man, that's Shakespearean right there, dude. I don't care who you are, I think.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, I think this is the closest we were going to get as a to like a demon in a bottle
Ooh.
storyline in the movie, and him having the drinking issues in this movie, which they didn't really fully explore. They hinted at, and
Mhm.
then they just kind of went away from it. Um, I really like the idea of him having the palladium poisoning him,
Mm.
but I just feel like the fix to it was kind of, I don't know, it just kind of happened. It was like, oh, here's a new element. All right, well, here's this new element, and then I'm going to put it in my chest, and it's just going to fix everything wrong with me.
Right.
It's not like, no, I just figured out a new way to power my armor that's not going to kill me. No, it also just completely heals me of the palladium poisoning as well. It's like a total
Yeah.
deus ex machina.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that a cheap way out?
It felt fairly cheap and tacked on.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind him having to discover a new element and stuff. Again, I just feel like this movie, I think the first act of it is really good. I feel like they have a really good setup, and then and then once it gets into the second and third act, it kind of doesn't know how to get its characters out of first gear.
Mm. Yeah, I'll buy that. I mean, I feel where you're coming from. Yeah, does the story flow enough to keep you moving with it, or are you sitting still, or they sat still and you're further ahead going, wait a minute, how come you're not up here? Why are we not doing this? Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, man, because man, the first maybe half hour or so of the movie is very good, and then it's
Mhm.
just like, okay, we've set up our premise, we've set up our conflict. What do we do next? And it's just like, okay, yeah, let's just have him discover this. Let's throw nods to all these other things. Let's do all these tie-ins and set up other things, but let's not really tell a real engaging story along the way.
Yeah. What about the big reveal that the city of tomorrow was something that his dad flat out gave him as a blueprint? Like his dad knew that Tony would figure it out, and then Tony figured it out. Like that seems almost like, I don't know. Hey guys, well thank goodness the car had gas in it so we could get away from the killer. That's a good thing. Like, you know what I mean? Sort of a, of course it worked. I mean, was that too convoluted, or what? Was that good for you? Did that work or no?
Yeah, it was a bit convenient. It was very much like the keys under the mat the whole time kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and I mean, you could easily, construct it as his dad might not have known that he was going to build armor and all this other stuff, but he kind of he left him behind the blueprint for, his greatest discovery. and he just managed to put it to a use that his dad might not have known about. But it's still very convenient that, yeah, of course, he figures out this element that his dad left him the blueprint to, that just happened to have something to do with the expo that he's running right now. And then he puts the element in his chest, and again, it just completely heals the palladium poisoning.
Yeah, dude. It just feels like you said, can of the mat. That's a good reference. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. I loved it when I first saw it. Then I thought, oh man, that's cool. But like, if you really start to dissect it, you're like, wait a minute, what? But I guess I don't know. I guess Howard was so incredibly intelligent that he knew there's no way his kid was going to grow up to be a plumber or an electrician. And those are noble professions, kids. No disrespect, but like Tony was going to grow up to be a freaking genius. Of course he was. Like, look who his dad is. I mean, I don't know what the thinking was there, but it was kind of convenient. I'll give you that. You mentioned Demon and Ball. I'm so glad you mentioned this. Did they miss an opportunity to really, really get deep with him, or did they do enough of that just with the other stuff, and they kind of, shied away from making him a full-blown alcoholic?
Yeah, I feel like they tiptoed around it a little bit, and then they never really gave us, a full-fledged alcoholic Tony Stark. I mean, I feel like they showed him being irresponsible and, reckless and all of these things, but they never really go full on and tell us he's an alcoholic. And I mean, maybe, it was a little bit too soon in the MCU to go full-fledged and go with such a mature theme. I don't think that they had the trust to do something like that yet, and it's still under the Disney umbrella. So they might it might have been hard to get that kind of mature stuff in there. I mean there's mature stuff in this movie, but it's different than making your main character a complete alcoholic.
Yeah. That would have been heavy. That would have been too much with the light-hearted tone of the banter, and God, he's so lovable, dude. He's so lovable. Tony Stark is so crazy lovable here, in all three movies, really. Would that have darkened it to the point that maybe they just didn't need to darken it that much,
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, I feel like if you were gonna at least if you were going to tease that, I feel like they should have developed it more in this movie, and maybe given us some more in the third movie. But it just kind of feels like they just, teased it a little bit, and then they never really went anywhere interesting with it.
Yeah, that's good. Good call. Because it got really heavy in the books, man. That the Demon and the Ball stuff. I mean, that's when comic books were really starting to stretch their legs. And Denny O'Neil did the junkie storyline with Speedy and Green Lantern and Green Arrow, and pursued a lot of themes that were sort of anti-establishment kind of thing. So, a lot of themes like that in books at the time that were sort of landmark for the times. Like these days, books like that are sort of, you expect books to some point to make a statement, and writers make a statement, but at the time it didn't really happen that much. Yeah, I didn't really bump into that at all. I wasn't looking for Tony to become an alcoholic, but we do get hints of it, that he's going in a bad direction, and his friends are extremely worried about him, where you can see them just getting physically upset that he's acting out. It's like, you're a grown man. What are you doing? Stop, because I wonder if this version of Tony in the MCU could have even become an alcoholic to begin with, because he immediately had people on top of him, Pepper and Rhodey, and maybe even Happy Hogan, who would have said, dude, that's enough. Like, I've had enough of this. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe the storyline wouldn't have worked anyway. Who's to say? What about, so we talked a little bit about Black Widow and her role in this film, and we don't really know what's going on with her here. What about the evolution of Pepper Potts? So Tony makes her CEO of Stark in here. Did that feel weird to you? Did you come up against that and go, wait, what? Because on one hand, you could say, is he pacifying her so she won't leave? He kind of feels like she's going to leave anyway because she's frustrated with him. Did that make sense to you, or was it just, well, this is what Tony Stark would do, obviously?
I thought it fit with the story that they were telling, and that he really thought he was dying. If he really thought he was dying, who would he trust to leave his company to?
Yeah.
And you get the feeling that if anybody in his life, he trusts Pepper more than anything, and he knows that she will run the ship properly. Uh, but again, it's just one of those things that they make the first act so grave, and then it's just kind of left by the wayside later. It's like, oh well, she's CEO. Well, what does she do as CEO? Oh, she just kind of tried to clean up his messes.
Yeah, big time. Did this movie miss the romantic part that we didn't get really anything between them till the last moment when he kisses her on the rooftop. Like they did a lot more in part one, and in this movie, it kind of felt like they weren't really even going there too much. Like, did it feel weird to you that they kind of started in part one and then dropped it off and didn't pick it up to the very end of this film, or did that make sense?
I think we're supposed to feel like he clearly cares about her in the beginning of the movie, but there's only so far he would go because he thought he was going to die, and he didn't want to. He didn't want to go too far with this and then end up dying and leaving her with what ifs. So I think by the end of the movie, when he knows he's going to live, then you could go and you could admit that you have feelings for her.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that because there's moments when you don't really piece together, like the stuff with him dying and drinking the stuff. It's those moments are so kind of dark and personal. And then you see him with her, and he's not telling her what's going on. And I guess there was moments for me personally I didn't kind of connect. Well, why is he not? What's going on? But then I go back to those scenes. I'm like, oh well, of course he's dying and he doesn't want to tell her. Um, the tech side of it. Now I know I asked you about the special effects and what your take were on that. Um, so this is the part where we debate something that's not real, but talk about how it applies to real world aspects. And you mentioned the drone situation, which is still, I'm sure, a very big thing. And um, who was it that I recently had a conversation with someone who like the job of operating drones in the military. Like these guys are, it's not a job you want because you're talking about depression, you're talking about counseling, you're talking about the suicide rate. I think for those positions is extremely high because you are carrying the burden of being the guy that pushed the button to wipe out villages, to wipe out women and children. I mean, it's not, not to get all real world here on you kids, but this stuff is happening in the world. Um, what about the notion of real world tech being owned by a private company? Well, I mean, I guess Stark is publicly traded because there's, in part one, they're talking about a board of directors and the investors. So I guess it is publicly traded, right, in the Marvel universe. But what about the idea that the government should have the Iron Man suit? And I know this is a goofball question for something that's not real, but let's say this stuff was real. Um, does the government have a right to this tech? Do you think that and we know what happens when the government gets a hold of it, they're going to weaponize it. Of course they are. But like, is there a point to be made that, hey, this guy shouldn't be in control of this much tech? Like it is extremely dangerous. I mean, if Elon Musk went south on us and suddenly he was developing weapons of mass destruction, I mean, he has to be reined in, right? So what's your take on the whole Stark and the Iron Man armor suit and all that stuff?
It's like a lot of other things in this movie. It's a very interesting idea there, but I don't think that they investigate it well.
Hmm.
Because there is some truth to him being a billionaire, and not just a billionaire. It's like he's a reckless, he's a reckless, womanizing. God, it's like the worst person for this advanced tech and weaponry to fall in the hands of, and he's just using
Yeah.
it for his own personal use. Yeah, of course, that would be a big deal to the government, and it wouldn't have been as simple as, "Hey, come into a hearing where, you know, we talked to you about this." Nah, I don't think it would have been that simple.
Oh,
And
good. Yeah, yeah.
and then you go into hearing and then kind of embarrass the government and embarrass everybody else and make the rest of the world look stupid, and then they just let it go. No, I don't think that would work that way.
And you would imagine in a real world scenario, the military would absolutely hate this guy. But at the same time, without Stark, the military wouldn't have all these cool weapons they've had for 20, 30, 40 years, right? So how many of the military top brass would really be after Stark's head, to be honest? Would they?
I think that they would have attempted to have a better relationship with him, just to get their hands on his tech. I think that they had such a good relationship with him for so long, based on his prior work. I don't think that it would have gotten antagonistic that fast. But at the same time, this is a billionaire playboy that is flying around with $1 million worth of, probably more than millions of dollars worth of tech, and he's just using it for his own personal gain. And I think the other thing that's missing, I didn't really realize this until I watched this movie this time. He doesn't really do anything heroic in this movie with armor. The first time we see him with armor, we get the great shoot the thrill scene at the beginning, where he comes to the Stark Expo and he shows it off. And then he uses the briefcase armor to save himself when Vanko tries to attack him. But he doesn't really do anything else heroic for the rest of the movie. All the rest of the stuff that happens is somebody attempting to kill him or destroy his company. Like, there's nothing else later that he does where it's like you get the idea, like, yeah, it is for the better good that he has his armor. It is, you get the kind of idea in the movie, like, no, maybe he shouldn't have his armor.
Yeah, like the government's got a point to want this stuff to take it away from him.
Yeah.
Well, it does bring up an interesting point, because Stark Industries has been manufacturing, war tech for war profiteering, right, for years. His dad did it, he was doing it, and then all of a sudden they develop something and tell the military you can't have it, and it's like, yeah, but why? Because you're selling everything else to us. Why can't we have this too? Ah, man, I don't know. In my head, I'm thinking you don't have the right to this. Like, if in a real world scenario, these tech companies who are building these weapons of war for the government, tanks and jeeps and weapons and the like, I mean, these companies aren't building weapons and holding on to them. They would build them and sell them to the highest bidder, which is hopefully the United States. I don't know. Man, maybe getting all real world political is not, the right call for a Marvel film, but it's almost like they will slow dance around things and then they won't take the plunge. Do they do enough of hinting at real world stuff and then pull back where they need to? Or do you think maybe some of it's just lip service, or do you think they have a good balance here?
I think they handle the real world and social political stuff better in the Captain America movies. I just don't think that they had a sophisticated enough script to handle the themes in this movie that they were trying to handle. Because I do think it's a very interesting idea of what would the government think of this man having this kind of weaponry at his fingertips and this kind of advanced technology just in his basement. But I just don't think that they really executed it well here. And that's mostly because there isn't a real script to this movie.
Oh, man. So the story doesn't really hold together for you to that degree that you feel like the script is that flimsy?
Yeah, I feel like the script is pretty thin for this movie. It's just not enough there to get us. I don't want to say to get us interested in the concept, because I am interested in the concept, but after the first act and he goes to their hearing, it's just kind of like, all right, well, now Rhodey is just showing up and trying to supervise him. That's not really it's not really enough to get me to continue to care about this plot point.
Yeah, that's a good call. Hogan's role doesn't really get expanded at all till part 3. He's barely there in part 1. He's barely there in part 2. In part 3, he really starts to get over as a central character who is important to Tony Stark's universe. I love the fact that as we said before, Tony's dying in this film, right? Or he thinks he is, or he is. So his actions are more reckless than ever before, even reckless by Tony Stark's definition. The tech in this movie we've talked about quite a bit. What about the scene where they're out there and they've loaded up the War Machine suit of armor, and he tries to fire the rocket. What do they call that rocket? Is the Widowmaker? What's he call it again? That shoulder rocket.
Oh, the ex-wife.
That's it, the ex-wife. And the thing just clangs against Vonko's armor. And Tony's like, hammer tech? And he's like, yeah. Like, that's so funny, dude.
Hilarious. Man, because that scene is so good when Vanko is like taking all of those guns out of their bag and he's like showcasing them and giving like this great showcase of what they are. And he just puts over how great this little rocket is. Of course it doesn't work because it's hammer.
It's like, it's the best I got. He's like, you got to give me something. I'm dying over here. Give me something. I can't read you. That's testament to Rockwell. I've seen this take before, so I'll hit you with it. Is he the most underrated villain we've seen in the Marvel movie so far? Will he ever get enough credit?
I think that he is very underrated, and I think he was very underused in Iron Man franchise. And I kind of came away from this movie wishing that he was just the main villain instead of Vanko.
Interesting. What would you have done? If there's no Whiplash, what would you have done? Would you have putting Hammer inside of a suit kind of feels like Obadiah Stane with Warmonger, right? So what would you have done?
You didn't necessarily have to put him in a suit, but you could have done the same drones, right? You could have done the drones again, and you could have done interesting things with Hammer, as the next guy to step in where Tony had left off, and you could go into the same concepts of war profiteering from the first movie. And you could just use Hammer to do these things. You could have had Hammer lose in a similar way and have him come back in a sequel. Do something other than just have him be here for comic relief for most of the movie and then, kind of coast off the fact that he's a good actor and then just don't bring him back again. I mean, I know he showed up in that short too, with Trevor Slattery. He's in jail with him, but we don't really see him again in an interesting way. And I feel like they very much misuse Sam Rockwell. He's such a good actor that I feel like they could have done so much more with him.
How would you bring him back? How would you bring him back now and not make it disrespectful to the loss of Tony? I mean, they could just bring him back anywhere and he wouldn't even have to mention Tony, would he? I mean, he's not necessarily a Tony villain anymore because it's over, but how would you bring him back if you could?
If I brought him back, I would have him as a consultant for the Thunderbolts.
Oh, that's good. I'm digging that. Yeah, I'm digging that. Yeah, man, you're right. Because he never got enough credit for this, I don't think. And you're right, they did mishandle him. The moments he had on camera, he chewed the scenery because he's that entertaining. He's that fun.
Yeah, I think one of the best scenes he acts in because he's doing all of this hammy comedic stuff for most of the movie, and he gets serious a few times. But towards the end, when he gets serious with Pepper, and he was like, he's like, "You think you're making a problem for me? I'll make a problem for you." And just the way that he delivers those lines is so good.
Yeah, and what was it? He's calling her sweetheart or honey or something like. God, man, what a douche. You know what I mean? Even in the end, he's a bad guy. It's like, what are you doing, honey? What's this about? What are you doing? Yeah, I was kind of upset that we never really got another real solid presentation of his character again. But where, in your opinion, does this movie fail where the first Iron Man succeeds? Is that a fair comparison since it's a sequel, or should you hold it up to the first one and say, no, they need to live up to the first one? What's your take on that? Where does it work in terms of being compared to the first one? Where does it not?
I think it's fair to compare it because, I mean, when you look at some of the other franchises and, which ones, the sequel exceeded expectations or was better than the first one. Like, I think Cap 2 is an easy is an easy answer. Winter Soldier is much better than First Avenger. You can make a case for Guardians Volume 2 being better than Guardians Volume 1. Um, I mean, I feel like the few where you can say that it was worse, I'm one of the few people that I think Dark World is better than the original Thor movie. Um,
Ooh.
but yeah, I feel like the few times that you can say that it wasn't is this and Age of Ultron. And Age of Ultron is not a bad movie, but it's not quite as good as the first Avengers movie. Um, but this one, I feel like it falls short because I feel like they saw everything that worked in Iron Man and letting Robert improv and kind of letting the script be less important as the actors really chewing up the scenery and getting these good performances out of their cast. And I just don't feel like there's enough here for the cast to work with. There's just not enough material for them to chew on. And then there's just so many moving parts in the cast. I mean, you've got to introduce Natasha. You've got to bring back Fury. You've got to bring back Coulson. Um, you got to try and give Rhodey a bigger role in the movie. And they didn't really do any of those things really well. They just kind of went, oh, here's some characters. They'll be back later. I promise.
Right. Um, yeah, no doubt. And I love, back to Natasha for a sec. I love the relationship she had with Tony was different than I think that she had with anyone else on the team. Like, you could envision her and Banner perhaps being together. You could maybe envision that with her and Steve to a point. I don't know if we could envision her with Tony. And their relationship is, I don't know. I think it's more complex than she has with anyone else on the team. Is that fair to say?
I would say so. I think that she has managed to flirt with almost every member of the team, other than the original member of the team, other than Hawkeye. Um,
Hmm.
it is their relationship is interesting, but I think she just kind of looks at him as part of the mission, and we
Yeah.
we don't we don't really get any of the intricate character stuff that we get with her in Hawkeye and the Avengers movies. We don't get any of the interesting stuff we got with her and Cap and Winter Soldier. Man, I feel like we even got more interesting stuff between her and Hulk. I just don't feel like they really developed much for Natasha in this movie.
Hmm. And no, I honestly, I'll totally agree with that. I would think that her connection with Hawkeye is different and deeper than anyone else on the team because they've been together the longest. And I don't think the two of them could have been together anyway, because I think that it's much deeper than being romantic. I think they've seen the best and worst of each other, but they still hang together no matter what, ride or die, right? So I love the fact that she has different relationships with everybody on the team, but not like, well, she slept with that guy, then she slept with that guy. That would have been a very easy thing to do, and not even play her out to be cheap per se. I don't think they would have had to even suggest that. But instead of playing it that way, they just play it like, no, she's one of the guys, or she's part of the team. Her relationship with each one's going to be different, just like Tony and Steve have a different relationship than Tony and Banner do. So it's just, I like the fact that she's treated in a large degree in the other movies as she's complex and she's not just one dimensional. But like you said, in this film, she is very one dimensional. Is that because maybe they didn't know what she was going to be later on?
Yeah, I think they just wanted to bring in a member of the Avengers for this movie and set them up. Um, but they didn't really have long term plans for her. They just wanted to get her on screen as a major cameo.
Well, let me ask you this: what's your favorite moment from the film, if you have one? And what's the moment that made you roll your eyes the hardest? Like, what's your high and what's your low?
I would say that the highs are, the Monaco scene with him doing the briefcase
Mm.
armor and that short fight. The fight with the drones is probably the highlight of the movie. And man, the final fight with Vanko is so short. It's so short. And then they used the gag from earlier, the crossing the beams to beat him, which is kind of cheap.
Yeah.
I would say the most eye roll version moment in the movie is the party scene and him blowing up things with the with their posters, like having women throw things
Yeah.
at him and him blast them out of the air. It just seems so. I don't want to say that it seems so out of character, but it just doesn't quite fit.
That's fair. That's fair because like it's not out of character, but yeah.
Yeah, it just seems a little bit too over the top. I mean, a woman literally walked in there with a watermelon and threw it in the air for him to blast it.
And I love that he did a Gallagher reference, which 2/3 of that audience watching that film probably didn't get, which is great to me because I totally got it. But then I was reminded, oh, I'm old. Oh, it sucks.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I just think the way that Tony acts in that scene is just so ridiculously over the top. Robert Downey Jr. I think he does the best he can with those scenes, but him, like, I don't know, making like these poses and yelling at the screen, it's just like, yeah, this is not very good.
I think for me, the moments that are really, really good is when he can go deeper than just the witty. And I love the banter. I love that. I live for it. The charming Tony Stark, give it to me all day. But when he can go deeper is when I really get in. Like when Pepper's like out of the room and he's talking to Natasha 101, he's like, how do you do it? I've never seen anything like it in my life. Is there anything real about you? And he's like disgusted with her. Like the look on his face is like, you disgust me. You lied to me from day one. You're lying to her. Who do you think you are? Just that look, man, that felt so real to me. That was like, this is how a guy would react right now in this moment, is exactly what he's saying to her. And as we would find out later, she's a very deep character. Had we known at the time, that probably stung her quite a bit. The fact that he said, is there anything real about you? Like this coming from Tony Stark? Like when Tony Stark's asking someone, is there anything real about you? That's some deep stuff, man. I personally love those moments. The briefcase part, you're right, 100% great. The eye rolling stuff, yeah, that would probably have to be the party. Little ridiculous there, and I rolled my eyes quite a bit at Rhodey just taking the armor and then handing it over. Like at this point, you're crossing the line from being a soldier, because he wasn't under orders to bring the armor. He just took the armor to them. So that he flat out stole tech from his best friend. Like, I don't know, dude.
Yeah,
I kind of bumped into that just a little bit.
Yeah, they handled that pretty poorly. I mean, them having that fight and then him just kind of walking off with the armor, and then Tony didn't really do anything to stop it. Now, you can imply that he knew that he was dying, and so he probably thought like, hey, if anybody I want in the last moments that I know to take my tech and take it to the government, I would prefer it to be Rhodey. It's kind of the same with Pepper taking the company. Like, at least I know this is my friend, and I think that he'll have my best interest at heart. And we do see that later because he takes the reactor out and he hides it. He doesn't leave it in there. And so I think there's something to that. But again, it was just one of those things where there was just a little bit there to get us to think that, but they didn't really develop it well enough.
Yeah.
And I agree, there are so many small scenes of Robert Downey's acting that, man, it's just like he elevates the material he was given, but there's just not enough there for it to really turn into anything that interesting. I mean, man, when he figures out the element and he's sitting inside the element when he expands it, and he gives that great line, he's like, man, dead 20 years, still taking me to school. And I thought that was such a good line. I thought that was such a good way to nod to his complicated relationship with his dad, but I just don't think they really gave us anything that interesting with his dad's relationship other than that.
I'll buy that. We've talked a lot about the story, and by the way, I'm with you. I agree with that. We've talked a lot about the story here. Justin Theroux wrote this story. Justin Theroux wrote American Psycho. I mean, that's, his resume, Mulholland Drive. It's pretty good. But then you've got Zoolander, and you've got Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, and you've got let's see, the Strangers with Candy film, and you've got Miami Vice. By the way, his filmography, his resume is packed. This guy is busy, like he's been working a long time here. And then there's moments when he's like Megamind. Megamind's a very underrated flick, kids. If you've never seen it, it's excellent. Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I mean, he's and that's well, you know what? A lot of these are roles that he had. So he's an actor also. See, I don't know a lot. Do you know anything about this guy, Justin Theroux?
I don't. I that doesn't surprise me that this guy's also an actor, because it feels like it feels like they had the bare bones of a story and then they had notes of where they want to go with it. But it just doesn't really feel like a meaty script. It just feels like the script was pretty thin. And I mean, again, that's not to say that there's not the basis of a good story here. There is. But I just don't feel like it was ever really fully fleshed out.
Yeah, and I'm giving this guy a lot of writing credits for stuff that he didn't do. So I'm reading his acting roles. So my apologies for that. Because I was thinking, man, this guy is the most prolific writer I've ever seen. He's busier than Stephen King if he wrote all this stuff. But he did not. So so my apologies.
Wait, so Justin Theroux, isn't he he's the Irish guy in Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, right?
He is.
The really ripped Irish guy that was in jail, and they keep playing like the Cape Fear music over him.
How do you remember this, by the way?
God, I don't know. They keep playing the Cape Fear stuff when he gets out of jail, and like the one scene he shows up and he's like, "Give us the rings." Yes. Give us the rings.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, he wrote the screenplay. He wrote the screenplay for Iron Man 2. But
interesting. I never knew that.
He's listed as a screenwriter, but then when you look up his bio, they're not separating. It's very weird to me. Screenwriter for films such as he wrote this. All right, so he wrote the screenplay for Tropic Thunder, which is a very underrated comedy.
Yeah, I love Tropic Thunder.
I do too. Rock of Ages, Dedication. I don't think I know that one. So his screenwriting credits do not add up to his acting credits, but there you go. It's funny, man. Especially in the Hollywood game, I think you just got to be right place, right time, and your story's seen by the right guy, and then it gets bought. That's what it kind of feels like here.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
The other scene I think of when he's in Charlie's Angels is his whole character is he's stalking his ex, which is played by Drew Barrymore, and Drew tried to sneak into a hotel, and she's disguised as a bellhop, I think. And so she thinks she gets away with it, and they like start this whole plan, and then he busts in the door at one point, and he just yells, "I know that ass anywhere." You think you fooled me? I know that ass anywhere.
Oh man. So the film was a hit, kids. Don't know if you know, but the budget for this film was around 170 to $200 million, which is not chump change. It made $624 million. So Phil, I think it did pretty well.
Yeah. So I mean, it was gonna do well because the first Iron Man was such a understated hit for what it was. And I guarantee you, even if people didn't go to the movies to see it, it did really well on DVD and other things. And so, yeah, of course, it was going to do very well commercially. But, man, I just wish that the sequel was a bit better. And it feels like I'm dumping all over this thing. There are a lot of things I enjoy about this movie. It's a fun movie, but man, it never really gets past being just a popcorn movie.
Well, we'll get to it when we get to do part 3 here, but part 1 better than part 2. I think we could both agree on that, yes?
Yes. I would
Okay.
I would wager to say that Iron Man 2 is the worst of the trilogy.
Oh, well, there you go. You've answered my part 3 question. But on part 3, I'll ask you if part 3 is better than part 1. Don't answer it now. You'll give no one anything to look forward to. You see what I'm saying? You bait the hook, and then you pull back just as they're about to grab it. So, well, there you have it, kids. That there is what we like to call Iron Man 2, the second chapter of what would come to be known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Remind me if I am misremembering. Was there anything between Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2? Because we get the Thor tease at the end of this. So the Thor hasn't happened yet. Captain America hasn't happened yet because they have that funny moment with what looks to be Cap's shield. And Tony's like, you know what this is? And they just prop up the pipe with it. So that was a throwaway moment.
That ridiculously large pipe that shot laser out of it. And we don't quite know what it is, but he just kind of uses it to direct into that triangle to make the element. Yeah.
Did they ever name the element, by the way?
I don't think they did. If they did, I forgot.
I don't know why. Why don't they name it? The other Hulk movie with Ed Norton happened in the meantime, because at the end of that, they had General Ross being visited by Tony Stark.
Yeah. But that was in 2008. That was the same year as the first Iron Man movie.
There you go.
Iron Man 2 came out in 2010, right?
Yes.
The other Marvel movies in 2010.
Well, Thor came right afterward, right? And then Cap came after Thor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Thor came out the year after Iron Man.
That sounds right.
I think, because I think Thor. Yeah, that's cool. Thor was 2011, so it was a year afterwards. Mm-hmm. It was exactly a year, because Iron Man 2 was May 7th, 2010. Thor was May 6th, 2011.
And we get Tony screwed up again in part 3, but this time it's the fallout from the Avengers film, and we will get there. But again, Phil, I submit, Tony Stark has been tortured in every single version we've seen, except for what you mentioned, which is a great call, when he's happy with his daughter and his wife, and everything's all good in Tony Stark land, which it had never been to that point. He is a tragic character. The most tragic character in the MCU. Would you think that? Would you submit to that to this point, he's the most tragic character? I mean, villains included, maybe. What do you think?
I mean, so a guy named Peter Parker shows up and all the people he loves start dying.
Well, if you're going to go that way, including the guy I'm talking about.
Yeah. Mentor
that dies on Peter.
Okay. Mentor dies. His both of his parents die. Both of his surrogate parents die. All of his friends no longer know who he is anymore. Yeah.
Well, forget my argument. So until Peter dies, well, I don't. How about this? Until Peter dies, Tony's the most tragic character in the MCU, because at least Peter's still got a fighting chance. What was it Mox used to say? As long as I got two hands, I got a fighting chance, right? So I'm just saying, I mix my references up as many times as possible in a given day. All right, kids, Iron Man 2, there you have it. Be sure to stay tuned for Iron Man 3. It's coming. Couldn't tell you when. I don't know when this is going to be released. What do I know? Everything? I'm just like hosting and producing this thing. What do I know? Phil, let's take this thing home, my friend. Give me your last word on Iron Man 2.
Iron Man 2 is a very flawed movie, but I feel like there's a lot here to enjoy. There is no real bad MCU movie, in my opinion. I feel like there's something to like about all of them, but I definitely feel like this is one of the weaker movies. It at least set up other things later. I feel like we get good payoffs in other movies based off things that happen here, but I wish that it was just a little bit better.
So I know that that's your last word and we're done, right? But here's something I just thought of. It didn't hit me till just now, actually. Iron Man was the only trilogy that has not had a subtitle. Thor's movies had a subtitle, Cap's movies, Spider-Man's movies, but Iron Man's does not. Wonder why that was done.
Yeah, Avengers also subtitle.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be that they were just so early in the process that everything was pretty bare bones at that point. Yeah, it's just Iron Man, Iron Man 2. The other ones, I feel like more thought went into the creation of them. I mean, you can make a case for Guardians because it's just Guardians Volume 2.
Well, yeah, okay, I'll take that. Yeah. So yeah, I will echo what Phil said. It's not a terrible movie. Is it the weakest? Yeah, it's the weakest of the three. I will submit to that. Does it do what it needs to do to be an entertaining Iron Man film? I think so. It's not. I don't know. As we said earlier, does it tap dance around some serious stuff? Yeah, it really does. But the level of the depths of seriousness we go to an MCU film will vary depending on the character. And we're only going to get so deep with Tony, which is a good thing and a bad thing. I think it can be taken as both. As we said, stay tuned, folks. Part 3 of this film analysis will come soon. So as we always say, keep tabs on the show. I don't number any of these episodes intentionally. That way you're not obligated to watch anything or listen to anything in order. You pick up as you want to and you listen to them independent of each other. We oftentimes reference during the course of a conversation, hey, we covered this episode before. So if you're listening to them random, willy-nilly, as they say, you may be getting some references that you don't pick up on until later. So it doesn't matter. Hit shuffle on the playlist and just listen to them as they come. And hopefully you will enjoy them as much as we do actually doing them in the first place. That's it, kids. And what happens to Iron Man moving forward? Whew. We've covered a little bit of that in the past. We'll get to that again eventually, I'm sure. Is Tony Stark really done? We'll see what the future holds. But in the meantime, at least for now, that is Iron Man 2. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.